A few years ago, I started working as a flight attendant with a small airline based out of San Diego, California. It was my first real job, and I was excited. The airline mostly handled short flights along the West Coast, cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. It seemed perfect for someone like me, fresh out of training and eager to see new places. Everything started normally enough. My shifts were mostly morning flights, which meant early wake-ups, but also early evenings. I lived alone in a cozy apartment near Mission Valley. My routine quickly fell into place. Early mornings, busy afternoons, then quiet evenings at home, unwinding before an early bedtime. About a month into my job, things took an odd turn. It began subtly. I noticed a passenger, a man in his late 30s named Jonathan, as I later learned, appearing on several of my flights. He was quiet, always polite, and nothing about him initially raised alarms. Frequent flyers were common. It wasn't unusual to see familiar faces on routes like these. So at first, I didn't think much about it. But after seeing him for the fourth time in 2 weeks, always on my specific flights, I began to feel uneasy. Each time, he'd smile politely, say hello, but then watch me quietly from his seat. There wasn't anything inherently threatening about him, but something about his quiet gaze felt intense, almost overly familiar. I tried to shake it off as paranoia. After all, as a flight attendant, dealing with passengers was part of my job. But soon, his presence seemed less coincidental. On a flight from San Diego to Seattle, I glanced toward his seat halfway through the flight and saw him taking a photo, pointed directly at me. When our eyes met, he calmly lowered his phone, smiled, and looked away. The next day, on a different flight, I deliberately avoided looking his way. But during beverage service, I caught him glancing over repeatedly. Each time he noticed me looking back, he would quickly avert his gaze. It felt calculated, as though he were testing how much he could get away with. My discomfort grew. I hadn't told anyone about this man yet, not my colleagues, friends, or family. Part of me was embarrassed. Maybe I was just overreacting. It wasn't uncommon for crew members to attract occasional unwanted attention. But there was something unsettlingly deliberate about Jonathan's behavior. A turning point came a week later during an overnight layover in Portland. It had been a tiring day with multiple flights, and I was looking forward to a peaceful night at the hotel. After checking into the Marriott downtown, I decided to walk to a nearby cafe for dinner. As I stepped onto the street, I glanced casually across the road and froze. Jonathan was standing under a street lamp, seemingly waiting for someone. My heart immediately began to pound. Maybe it was just a coincidence. He was probably a business traveler after all. But then I recalled he'd been on my earlier flight. Was he following me? Trying to remain calm, I crossed the street in the opposite direction and walked quickly toward the cafe, hoping he hadn't noticed me. Inside, I chose a table far from the windows and kept nervously checking outside. Halfway through my meal, the door opened and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Jonathan entered. He didn't approach me. Instead, he ordered a coffee, sat at the counter, and casually glanced my way, acknowledging me with a slight nod. My appetite vanished. I quickly paid, left the cafe, and hurried back to the hotel, constantly checking behind me. Thankfully, I didn't see him again that night, but sleep came difficultly. By now, his behavior had crossed a line. I debated reporting him to the airline, but I still felt unsure. He hadn't explicitly threatened me or done anything illegal that I could prove. Still, fear had begun to shape my days. At work, I found myself constantly scanning passengers' faces, dreading his presence. Weeks went by without seeing him, and I began to relax, convincing myself it had all been my imagination running wild. Then, on a late evening flight from Los Angeles to San Diego, I saw his face again. This time, he was in the front row, right next to the galley. I felt trapped. Throughout the short flight, Jonathan watched my every move openly. It was as if he wanted me to notice, to understand he wasn't going away. After landing, I waited until everyone else had exited, trying to avoid confronting him, but he lingered deliberately, taking his time gathering his things. Finally, as he passed me, he leaned slightly closer and said, "Have a good night. I'll see you soon." My blood went cold. His words seemed harmless, but the tone and the intent behind them felt menacing. Once he left, I stood frozen, heart racing. I realized then I couldn't ignore this anymore. I needed to report him. The next day, I spoke with my supervisor, finally sharing everything. Airline security and local police became involved, but they told me there was little they could do without clearer evidence or explicit threats. Jonathan hadn't committed a clear crime, yet. The airline changed my schedule and took me off flights temporarily, hoping distance would discourage him. It seemed to help, at least at first. Weeks passed quietly, but one night, as I entered my apartment building after grocery shopping, I noticed a folded note slipped under my door. Shaking, I opened it. Inside was a single, neatly printed sentence. "You shouldn't have told anyone." My hands trembled as I stared at the words, realizing with terrifying clarity what this meant. He knew exactly where I lived. I immediately called the police, showing them the note. They investigated, reviewed security footage, but found no clear images of anyone suspicious. Again, I was left with nothing but fear. Eventually, I had no choice but to move apartments, change my contact information, and even request transfers within the airline. Slowly, I tried rebuilding a sense of normalcy, though the memory haunted me. Today, I still look over my shoulder whenever I'm alone, always vigilant, always cautious. The man called Jonathan never showed himself again, but I never shake the feeling he's out there, somewhere, patiently waiting. I had not flown in years, but my grandson insisted I attend his college graduation in Miami. He booked me on the cheapest red-eye he could find, United Flight 1658, leaving San Francisco at 11:55 p.m. and landing a little after 8 the next morning. I am 69 and walk with a cane, so the gate agent kindly pre-boarded me. Row 14 was only halfway down the cabin, right side. My seat was 14B, an aisle. The window, 14A, showed as vacant on the boarding screen. An empty seat beside me felt like a small gift. I stowed my purse, settled my coat over my knees, and listened to the slow river of other passengers filing past. Most looked tired, hoodies, earbuds, paper coffee cups shaking in nervous hands. When boarding seemed almost done, a man stepped into my row. He did not hesitate or check his ticket. He simply turned sideways, slipped into 14A, and sat. I felt the brush of a heavy wool coat against my sleeve. His head stayed low, chin tucked into a gray scarf. No carry-on, no drink. He folded his hands in his lap, fingers pale against black gloves. I decided to be polite. "Long night," I whispered. He did not move. I tried again. "Miami's warmer than this." Nothing. I laughed softly, more for myself than him, and faced the aisle. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. I expected him to buckle in, but his belt was already clicked. Perhaps he fastened it before I noticed. During the climb, the plane shuddered the way planes do, like a bus on a gravel road. My seatmate neither flinched nor shifted. His shoulders stayed square, posture too stiff for someone who planned to sleep. I watched the yellow seatbelt sign glow off his coat's dull fibers. Each thread looked damp, almost sticky, as if he had walked through drizzle. An hour later, the attendants began their quiet service. The cart rattled up the aisle, offering water and pretzels. When the woman reached our row, she leaned toward me. "Anything to drink?" I took a ginger ale. She glanced at the window seat, eyes puzzled. "And for him? He hasn't said a word," I whispered. She bent closer to the man. "Sir?" No answer. She waited the required beat, then placed a miniature water on his tray table, untouched. The cart moved on. I sipped my ginger ale, the bubbles sharp in the back of my mouth. I noticed the man's gloves. No airline reflection on the leather, as if they swallowed light. His breath made no fog in the dim cabin air. I must have nodded off because I woke to darkness, except for emergency aisle markers and a faint movie glow from 3 rows ahead. My watch said 3:07 a.m. My neck was sore. I stretched a little and felt the man's coat sleeve again, pressing gently against my arm, as though he had leaned my way while I slept. The pressure was constant, not the accidental bump of turbulence. I drew back, but the armrest pinned me. I said, "Sir, could you give me a little space?" No response. I pressed the call button. Nothing happened. Perhaps the bulb had burned out. Instead of waiting, I decided to use the restroom. I rose carefully, stepped into the aisle, and shuffled toward the rear galley. Behind me, the man did not move. The restroom line was short. 2 teenagers and a businessman waited. I glanced down the aisle. From that angle, seat 14A looked empty. Only a bare headrest caught the blue light. I frowned, tilted my head, and squinted. Still empty. A cold thought slid through me. Maybe he had followed me. yet I had heard no footsteps. When I returned, 14A was occupied again by the same unmoving shape. I eased into 14B, heart thumping like a hand on a door. I tried to rest but kept listening for breathing. Nothing. Only the steady drone of engines and the occasional clink of glasses in first class. As dawn approached, a faint pink edge appeared through the window across the aisle. Cabin lights brightened. The lead attendant announced we would begin our descent soon and asked everyone to raise their seat backs. The man beside me stayed rigid. I focused on small tasks, folding my blanket, straightening my purse strap until the wheels clunked down. We landed at 8:11 a.m., rolling past bright Florida grass. Passengers unclipped their belts, stood, stretched, and retrieved bags. I waited for help with my cane. When I finally rose, the man still sat, hands folded, gaze down. I touched his sleeve, meaning to say goodbye or at least excuse myself. The wool felt colder than the window glass. I shuffled past and exited. Inside the jet bridge, a young attendant hurried up behind me, breathless. "Ma'am, did you sit in 14B? "Yes." "Was anyone in the window seat?" I hesitated. A man in a gray coat. Her brow creased. "Our manifest shows 14A vacant. No one should have been there. He was there all night." Another attendant joined us, holding a tablet. She scrolled, frowned, then looked up. Boarding count balanced, every assigned seat filled, no extras. I felt lightheaded. Perhaps a last-minute standby? They exchanged looks. Gate records don't show that. One attendant gently guided me to a chair while the other walked back onto the plane. A minute later, she returned, shaken. "The seat is empty, belts still crossed." I insisted they check the cameras. They promised they would. I left unsettled, but trying to explain it away. Fatigue, dim light, my aging eyes. At my son's house, I told the story. He half smiled, half worried, and asked whether I had any proof. I remembered the photo. During boarding, I had taken a quick picture of the cabin to send my daughter, a silly boast about traveling alone. I opened the gallery. Row 14 glowed back at me. 2 seats, mine and an empty window. No gray coat, no gloved hands. Yet my memory of the coat's scratchy fabric was as firm as the phone in my palm. I could still feel its weight against my arm, still recall the stale scent of wet wool. I spent the day with family, trying to enjoy the celebrations, but the night brought uneasy thoughts. I lay in the guest bed, replaying each moment, the boarding, the silent man, the untouched water. I wondered whether some people travel a different way, slipping between passenger counts and camera frames, needing only a seat and the warmth of another body nearby. Maybe he had not meant harm. Maybe he only wanted company for a long, cold flight. The next morning, curiosity overrode fear. I called United Customer Service. After 3 transfers, I reached a supervisor. I asked if the crew had found any belongings in 14A, wallet, ticket stub, anything. She said housekeeping reported nothing but a sealed bottle of water. She then asked if I was the woman who filed the incident note upon arrival. I said yes. She paused and lowered her voice. The flight deck reviewed the passenger list and security footage at boarding. There is no record of anyone stepping into that seat. I thanked her and hung up. My hands trembled, but not from cold. I scrolled through my contacts and found my late husband's number, still saved though he passed 3 years ago. I tapped it, knowing it would go nowhere, yet wanting to hear the automatic message just to fill the room with a voice, even a recorded one. Outside, distant traffic hummed like airplane engines.